Senior Chief Mercer threw her through the gate like she was garbage. 6 German shepherds turned as one. The gate clanged shut. He crossed his arms and waited for the screaming. Kira Dawson, 22 years old, dark brown hair loose past her shoulders, olive green sports bra, camouflage pants torn at the knee, opened her eyes and said one word. One quiet word. The lead dog stopped 3 feet from her face. His tail moved once. He lay down beside her like he had been waiting 7 years for her to come home. Subscribe now and follow this story all the way to the end. Drop your city in the comments. Let's see how far this travels. The Naval Special Warfare Training Compound at Coronado had seen everything a human being could produce under maximum pressure. It had watched men arrive believing they were exceptional and leave understanding what exceptional actually costs. It had never seen anything like what happened inside that K9 compound on a Tuesday morning in October, and it had never seen the face that Senior Chief Boyd Mercer made when he realized what he had just done. 6 weeks earlier, Mercer had picked up Kira Dawson's file during the first morning formation and felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Not curiosity, unease. The file said Veterinary Support Specialist, Fort Campbell, cross-trained and assessed for Naval Special Warfare consideration. Nothing remarkable, nothing threatening. Just another candidate who, by every calculation Mercer had refined across 22 years of doing this job, would ring the bell inside 10 days. But the file didn't match what he was looking at. The way she moved through formation was wrong. Too economical. No wasted motion anywhere. The stillness she carried between actions was the stillness of someone who had learned in environments where waste had real consequences, where a single unnecessary movement could be the difference between coming home and not coming home. Her eyes swept the compound during his opening speech and came back having counted and cataloged everything in it. He saw it happen. He had been watching candidates for 2 decades, and he saw exactly what her eyes did in those 4 seconds, and it did not match Veterinary Support Specialist from Fort Campbell. He walked toward her. "You, candidate, step forward." She stepped forward without hesitation. No visible reaction. "Candidate Dawson, Senior Chief." He circled her slowly. "Your file says Veterinary Support Specialist. That means you spent your service career playing with dogs while real operators were fighting real wars. Is that accurate, Candidate Dawson?" "I worked with military working dogs, Senior Chief." "Dogs." He stopped in front of her, close enough that she could smell the coffee on his breath. "You taught animals to sit and stay. Now you want to be a Navy SEAL?" She met his eyes and said something that lodged in his mind like a splinter and stayed there for 6 weeks. "I'm here to find out, Senior Chief." Something moved through her eyes when she said it. Not defiance, something older and deeper than defiance. Something Mercer could not identify, which was the problem, because Mercer had been identifying people for 22 years, and the things he couldn't identify made him dangerous. "We'll see about that, Dawson," he said. "We'll see." From the far side of the compound, Master Chief Leonard Voss watched through binoculars. 67 years old, back still straight as rebar, eyes that had absorbed more of the world's hard realities than most people ever got close to. The moment he saw Kira Dawson's face, his mind went somewhere that was 31 years away and felt like yesterday. Same eyes as her father, same hunter's stillness, same quality of attention that preceded something the person being watched wasn't going to enjoy. Marcus Thorne's daughter, Voss thought. Cole Dawson's girl. God help us all. The first 2 weeks separated the people who thought they wanted this from the people who actually did. The bell rang with the steady regularity of a clock nobody wanted to hear. Men who had dreamed about becoming SEALs, discovered the precise distance between dreaming and doing, and found it impossible to cross. 3 candidates per day, on average, until the formation that had started at 37 was down to 22. Kira didn't ring the bell. She didn't complain. She didn't make excuses. She endured every evolution with a patience that began to unsettle instructors who had seen every variation of human stubbornness this program could produce. "Something is wrong with her," Instructor Webb said during the second week, watching Kira complete a punishment evolution that Mercer had designed specifically for her. 4 hours of surf torture alone, while the rest of the class moved on to other training. She came out of the Pacific, blue-lipped and shaking, but her eyes held the same quality they'd held when she stepped off the bus on day 1. Mercer watched from the tower. "She's hiding something." "Like what?" "I don't know yet, but I'm going to find out." He made her his project. Extra evolutions, isolation drills, psychological pressure designed to reach the place that physical pressure couldn't. He was systematic about it, clinical. He had broken harder-looking people with less. The other candidates started calling her Ghost by the end of the second week. Not because she was quiet, though she rarely spoke more than necessary. Because she kept disappearing into whatever environment surrounded her, and reappearing exactly where she needed to be, like someone who understood terrain at a level that went beyond training. On the third night of the second week, Master Chief Voss intercepted her during a rare moment alone. The other candidates had collapsed in their racks. Kira sat outside the barracks, cleaning her boots with movements so automatic they looked like something a person does when their hands need to be busy so their mind can work. "Candidate Dawson," Voss said from the darkness. "A word." She stood immediately, turned to face him, and something in her posture shifted. Not quite recognition, something more complicated. The look of a person who has been expecting a specific conversation and has been calculating how to handle it. "Master Chief." Voss stepped into the light from the barracks window. "Your father, Cole Dawson, Master Sergeant, Special Forces, K9 handler, call sign Shepherd. Died in what the official record calls a training accident over Afghanistan in 2017. Her hand moved toward her waistband, muscle memory reaching for something that wasn't there. She caught herself, but not before Voss registered it. The instinct of a person who had been in situations where reaching for a weapon was the appropriate response to hearing something dangerous said out loud. "How do you know that name?" she said. "I trained him. I was with the handler program when you were born. I held you when you were 3 days old because your father was so exhausted he couldn't see straight, but he still wouldn't let anyone else handle you." Voss's voice did something it almost never did. It softened. "I know exactly why you're here, Kira." The use of her first name hit her like something physical. Nobody at BUD/S used first names. Candidates were candidates until they earned the right to something else. "I'm here to become a SEAL," she said. "You're here to keep a promise to a woman named Rebecca Ward, and to find out who killed your father." Voss met her eyes without flinching. "And I'm here to make sure you survive long enough to do both." The silence between them lasted about 5 seconds. 2 people measuring each other across a generation gap, and a shared grief that neither of them had finished carrying. "Ward told me to find you," Kira said finally, "before she died. She said you knew about the pattern." "I know pieces. Your father knew more. That's why they killed him." Voss glanced toward the instructor compound. "Mercer is going to keep targeting you. He sees a female candidate who doesn't belong. He doesn't see what I see." He pulled something from his pocket, a small SD card, held out flat on his palm. "Your father's last transmission, encrypted for 7 years. I cracked it 6 months ago." She looked at it without touching it. "This is everything. Voss said. His voice, his evidence, his final instructions. He pressed it into her palm. Listen to it when you're alone. He closed her fingers around it, because after you hear it, everything changes. And I need you to be ready for that before it happens. He started to walk away, then stopped. One more thing. Mercer thinks he's hunting you. He doesn't realize I'm hunting whoever killed your father.
He looked back at her.
Your father said something to me 3 days before Iron Hollow. He said, "When Kira comes, tell her I built her for exactly the moment she'll be standing in."
Voss met her eyes.
I didn't fully understand what he meant until I watched you come off that bus and move through that first formation. Now I understand.
He walked away. Kira stood in the dark with a piece of plastic in her fist that weighed more than all her gear combined. That night, alone in her rack while 21 other candidates slept the sleep of the genuinely destroyed, she put the SD card in the reader she had been carrying since she left Tennessee and listened to her father's voice for the first time in 7 years.
Voss, if you're hearing this, then I'm probably already gone, and you kept your promise, which means you found a way to give this to Kira, which means she came. I knew she would come. She is better than I ever was, and she doesn't know it yet. His voice, exactly as she remembered. The particular quality of it, the way it carried certainty without needing volume. She pressed the back of her hand against her mouth and breathed through her nose and kept listening. I found Meridian Tactical. It's a shell company, Voss. 16 years of Ridgeline handler deployment data, sold to 3 foreign buyers. And every time one of our people got close to the money trail, they died in something that looked like an accident. Because the man running the operation has had 30 years to perfect making things look like accidents. I have the banking records. I have the communication intercepts. What I don't have is the final link. 1 wire transfer authorization with a flag officer's personal authentication code on it. I'm meeting a contact tomorrow who has a copy of that authorization. A pause. Long enough that she could hear him breathing. Long enough that she understood this was a man who knew he was recording his last message and was choosing how to use the remaining seconds. Tell Kira I love her. Tell her Atlas will know what to do. And Voss, finish this. Every handler who comes after us deserves to live long enough to finish their tour. Don't let them keep buying silence with our blood. The recording ended. Kira sat in the dark for 2 hours. She didn't cry. She had already given everything she had to crying for her father in the 7 years since the folded flag and the clean-typed official story. What she did instead was memorize every word, every inflection, every breath. She mapped the shape of what he had known and what he had been 3 days away from proving, and what it had cost him to be that close. Then she made a promise to the darkness and to the German shepherd she could hear breathing in his kennel 300 yards away, and to the man on that recording who had spent the last days of his life building a weapon he would never get to fire himself. I'm coming, Dad. I'm going to make them answer for every single one of us they took. The 3rd week brought something Kira had been waiting for. Not from Voss, not from any official direction. From the candidate to her left during a brief rest window. Petty Officer Rafe Okafor. Broad-shouldered, former Army Ranger, the only person in the class who moved through training with the same economy she did. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't ask questions. He said one thing and then walked away. I worked alongside Ridgeline handlers in Helmand Province. 2 of them. Both dive in what the official record calls accidents. He met her eyes without any particular expression. I know what accidents look like. Those weren't accidents. He walked away before she could respond. Another person who already knew part of the shape of the truth. Another person who had been waiting for someone to show up and give it a name. The fourth week brought escalation from Mercer. The underwater rescue changed things. A candidate named Graham had gone under during a boat evolution, tangled in equipment straps 8 feet down in churning water. And Kira had been in the water before anyone else processed what was happening. The rescue she executed was not BUD/S training. It was combat diver technique, Wolfpack protocol, things learned in places that didn't appear on any official service record. Graham walked out of the water because of her, and everyone present understood immediately that what they had just witnessed was not what a veterinary support specialist from Fort Campbell was capable of. Mercer came to her on the beach afterward, and his voice had gone somewhere flat and dangerous. "Where did you learn that technique, Candidate Dawson?" "Classified, Senior Chief." The word detonated between them. Mercer's face went through 3 different expressions in 2 seconds. Then it went to something she recognized. Not anger. Calculation. The look of a man who has just understood that the problem in front of him is considerably larger than he initially assessed. He walked away without another word. That night he made phone calls. Quiet calls that didn't go through official channels. He had contacts at Fort Campbell, contacts at SOCOM, people who owed him answers. By 2 in the morning, he had enough pieces to understand that candidate Elena Thorne was not what her file said she was. Not even close. What he didn't understand yet was that one of the people he'd called had a connection he hadn't accounted for. A connection that went sideways, up into Naval Special Warfare Command, and directly into the office of the man who had been making handler deaths look like accidents for 16 years. By 4 in the morning, Mercer had exposed her. He didn't know it yet. 2 days later, he came to her off the books, alone, finding her in a gap between evolutions. He sat down across from her without being invited, and for the first time since she had arrived, he did not look like a man with a predetermined verdict. "I made calls last week," he said, "after the underwater rescue. I was trying to figure out who you actually were. I talked to people at Fort Campbell and SOCOM." He met her eyes. "I think I may have told the wrong person something they should not have been told." Kira looked at him. "Which person?" "That's what I don't know. But Voss came to see me this morning. He told me some of what's happening. He told me who your father was, and what he found, and what it cost him." Mercer's jaw tightened. "I've spent 4 weeks trying to break you because I decided you didn't belong here. I was wrong about that." He looked at her directly. "And I'm not in the habit of making a mistake worse by refusing to acknowledge it." Kira held his gaze. "What are you offering?" "I'm offering to stop being the problem and start being useful." He stood. "Whatever's coming, you shouldn't be facing it without backup inside this program." He walked away before she could respond. She sat with that for a long moment. Then she went to find Voss. The morning Mercer announced the K9 stress inoculation evolution, the air in the formation felt different. Kira felt it before she understood it. The specific quality of tension that fills a space when multiple people know that what is about to happen is not what it appears to be. "Today's evolution," Mercer said, "K9 stress inoculation. Candidates will enter the compound individually and spend 5 minutes in controlled contact with military working dogs." He found Kira in the formation. "Candidate Dawson, you'll demonstrate first." She walked to the gate of the K9 compound, with the whole class watching. Atlas was already oriented toward her from across the compound. She could feel it before she could see it clearly. That particular quality of attention that meant a dog had recognized something important. She opened the gate and stepped inside. The gate closed behind her with a sound that had a different texture than the one Mercer had created 6 weeks ago when he had thrown her through it. That one had been an ending. This one felt like a beginning. 6 German shepherds turned as one, and then, as one, their posture shifted. Not toward threat, toward recognition. Atlas walked forward. 3 feet. 2. He pressed his tan and black muzzle against her left hand and held it there, and every observer on the outside of that fence understood simultaneously that they were watching something that was not part of any training protocol they had ever encountered. Outside the fence, Mercer exhaled slowly. Then he looked at Voss and said something quietly. "She's Ridgeline. You were right." Voss nodded. His eyes were not on the compound. They were on the entrance road, where a vehicle had just appeared and stopped. "Now we protect her," Voss said, "because someone already knows." The SUV sat at the compound entrance. 4 men got out. Civilian clothes, no insignia. The way they moved said everything their clothing was designed to conceal. The man in front walked directly toward Mercer, with the bearing of someone who has never needed rank displayed to communicate where authority actually lives. "We're here for Candidate Dawson. Orders from Naval Special Warfare Command." Mercer's jaw went rigid. "Nobody notified me of any transfer. I'm the senior instructor for this class. Classified. Step aside, Senior Chief." Voss moved forward and placed himself between the 4 men and the kennel gate. His body remembered every hard situation it had ever survived, and it remembered them now. "You're not taking her." The lead man's eyes found Voss's face. Something passed through them. Not surprise. Recognition. "Master Chief Voss, we were hoping you'd stay out of this." His voice dropped. "Like you stayed out of it with Cole Dawson." The words hit Voss in a place that had been sore for 7 years. His hands trembled. He didn't move an inch. "I stayed out of it with Cole because I wasn't ready." He said it flat and final and cold. "I'm ready now." He was bluffing. They both knew it. But the bluff bought seconds, and inside the compound, Kira had heard every word, and Atlas had felt the shift in her before she fully processed it herself. And all 6 German shepherds were at the fence, with their hackles raised and their teeth showing. "I wouldn't open that gate," Kira said from inside the compound. Her voice carried perfectly across the compound in the sudden quiet. 6 combat-trained dogs between you and me. 45 seconds from gate to your throats. You might stop 1. Maybe 2. She paused. "The rest will finish the calculation before you can reload." The lead man looked at the fence, looked at the dogs, ran the numbers, and didn't like where they landed. Okafor stepped out of the barracks behind the 4 men, with 3 other candidates at his shoulder. "And us." The standoff lasted 15 seconds that felt like 15 minutes. Then Commander Diana Strauss arrived with base security, and her voice carried the kind of authority that ends things without negotiating. "Stand down, all of you, now." The 4 men looked at each other. Too many witnesses, too much exposure. The lead man gestured, and they withdrew to the SUV and drove away without being stopped, without being detained, because people connected enough to show up with those credentials were connected enough to walk away from a confrontation that hadn't gone the way they planned. Strauss watched them go. Then she turned to the tableau at the kennel fence. Her eyes moved across Voss, Mercer, Okafor, the candidates. Then to Kira inside the compound, standing with one hand on Atlas's head and 5 other German shepherds pressed against her legs. "My office," Strauss said. "Garrett, Mercer, Dawson. Now." Her voice was controlled and completely certain. "And get that candidate out of the kennel." Kira came through the gate. Atlas stayed pressed against her left leg, as if he had no intention of allowing distance between them again. She put her hand on his head and felt his heartbeat. Steady. Certain. The heartbeat of an animal who has been doing his job since before she was old enough to understand what the job was. He had waited 7 years for her to come back. She had come back. Now both of them had work to finish. Strauss's office felt smaller than it should have, with 4 people in it who each knew something the others didn't and were calculating in real time how much to say. Kira sat across from the commander's desk, still in her torn uniform. Atlas had followed her through the door, and nobody told him to leave. Voss stood to her left. Mercer stood to her right. The geometry of it said everything about how the last 6 weeks had rearranged itself in the last 40 minutes. Strauss didn't waste time. "I know about Ridgeline," she said. "I've known about the pattern for 3 years. 7 handlers dead, all classified as accidents or combat casualties. All of them in the months after rotating through Naval Special Warfare Command headquarters." She looked at Kira directly. "I was Rebecca Ward's commanding officer. I knew what she was investigating before she died. 2 weeks before the vehicle accident that killed her, she came to me and told me she had evidence of a mole inside Nav Spec War Command. Someone selling handler deployment data to foreign intelligence buyers. She said she was close to identifying them." His voice went quiet. 1 week later, she was dead. Mercer's jaw tightened. "Why didn't you act?" "Because it goes higher than me. Someone at flag officer level." Strauss's expression didn't change, but something behind it did. "I've been trying to build enough to move without becoming the next accident for 3 years." She looked at Kira. "Then your father's daughter walked into my compound, and someone sent 4 men to take her in broad daylight, with witnesses everywhere." She said the name before Kira could say it herself. "Rear Admiral Glenn Harrow, Deputy Commander, Naval Special Warfare Command." The name sat in the room like something that had been there the whole time and was only now visible. Kira had known it was coming. Had known since the moment she listened to her father's recording and heard him say, "Flag officer," with banking records and personal authentication codes. But hearing it said aloud, in this room, by a base commander who had been carrying it for 3 years, made it real in a different way. Made it heavy in a different way. "Those 4 men who came for you," Strauss continued. "I ran the plates before I came to get you. The vehicles trace back through 3 shell companies to a security consulting firm, Paxton Risk Solutions. The man who spoke to Voss is Dean Paxton, former Delta Force, discharged under circumstances that were sealed. He's been running private wet work since 2016, connected to 4 suspicious deaths of special operations personnel that never resulted in charges." "He killed my father," Kira said. It wasn't a question. Voss looked at her. "We can't prove it yet, but the timeline fits his operational pattern. Your father's helicopter went down 2 days after Cole identified Harrow's shell company. Paxton had the technical capability, and Harrow had the motive and the reach to deploy him without leaving a visible trail." Mercer's hands clenched at his sides. He looked like a man processing the specific anger that comes from realizing the institution he gave 22 years to has been rotting from somewhere he never thought to check. "I spent 6 weeks making her life harder because I thought she was hiding something that didn't belong here." He said it quietly. She was hiding something that every handler in this program should have known about. She was hiding it because knowing about it is what got handlers killed, Voss said. Strauss leaned forward. "Here's how this plays out. Kira finishes BUD/S. 3 weeks remaining. We protect her around the clock. Garrett coordinates security. Mercer, you make sure no training evolution puts her in a position where Paxton's people can stage an accident. After graduation, I assign her to NAV Spec War headquarters as an intelligence liaison. Real position, real access. She collects what we need to bring Harrow down." "And if Harrow moves before graduation?" Kira asked. "Then we make sure his cleanup crew understands what happens when you threaten a SEAL candidate with 6 combat-trained German shepherds and the operators who trained beside their handlers." It was not entirely a plan. It was a direction. But it was enough. Mercer found her that evening during a rest window. He sat beside her without asking, and they didn't speak for almost a full minute. The silence between them was different from every silence they had shared over the previous 6 weeks. Less adversarial, more complicated. "Your father," he said finally. I knew that name, not personally, but in handler circles, Cole Dawson was a legend. The things he did in Kuwait and later in the program. The man who had thrown her through a gate and watched 6 German shepherds choose her over their training had just apologized for the first time in what she suspected was a very long time. "You didn't know," she said. "I should have read it better," he stood. "But I know now, and I'm not going to compound the mistake." He walked away, and she watched him go and thought about how people were capable of changing direction faster than institutions, and how that gap between the two things was where most of the damage in the world lived. Okafor found her an hour later. He showed her a photograph on his phone. The lead man from the SUV, face in profile as he retreated. Sharp jaw, scar above the left eyebrow. Weight carried forward in the way of someone who was always half a second from moving. "I recognized him during the standoff," Okafor said. "Different name in Afghanistan, but same face. He was running wet work in Helmand for someone senior in SOCOM, jobs that never made any official report. I thought he was gone after 2021. He paused. "He's not gone. He's just working for someone different now." "Paxton," Kira said. "That's the name Strauss gave me." Okafor pocketed the phone. "He's the best I've ever seen at making things look like something they aren't. Your father's helicopter, the other handlers, Ward's vehicle accident. If that's his work, he's had years to perfect it." He met her eyes. "Which means when you go after Harrow, you go after Paxton too. And you need to be ready for that." "I'm ready," Kira said. Okafor looked at her for a moment, not assessing, just looking. "Yeah," he said, "I think you are." He started to leave. Then he stopped with his back to her. "Those 2 handlers I worked with in Helmand." Kira waited. Okafor didn't turn around. They were good operators, the real kind, the kind who made everyone around them better. When they died, the official story had that same quality. Too clean, too simple. The kind of story that answers every question you think to ask and doesn't leave room for the ones you should be asking. He finally turned. "I never found a way to do anything about it." He met her eyes. "I'm glad someone is." He walked away. The 3 remaining weeks moved fast. Demolitions, combat medicine, small unit tactics. Everything a SEAL needed to know compressed into an impossible amount of time. Kira stopped managing the performance of concealment that had governed her first 6 weeks. Mercer had stopped forcing her to hide, and the freedom of it changed the texture of everything. She could use the skills Ridgeline had built into her without calculating what each one revealed, and the other candidates felt the change and recalibrated around her without being told why. On the second to last day of training, Strauss called her into the office again. Alone this time. "Your assignment to NAV Spec War headquarters is confirmed," Strauss said. "Intelligence Liaison, Special Programs Division. Real responsibilities, real access." She paused. "Harrow specifically requested you for the position after reviewing your BUD/S performance records. He wanted you where he could watch you." Kira absorbed this. He knows. He suspects. which makes this more dangerous and also more useful. Strauss met her eyes. He's going to watch every file you touch, every system you access, every person you talk to. If he catches you moving toward anything that threatens him, Paxton will know within the hour. Then I'll move carefully. Strauss slid a folder across the desk. Your official orders. Report 1 week after graduation. That gives you 7 days to prepare with Voss. She leaned forward. There's something else. Voss gave you a device. I know because I approved it, off the books, completely deniable if anything goes wrong. That device is your one real move. You use it once, maybe twice, before Harrow security systems detect the data transfer signature. Choose the moment carefully. I will. And when you use it, you get out immediately. Don't wait. Don't try to collect more. You take what you have and you disappear before he realizes what happened. Kira nodded and stood and picked up the folder and walked toward the door. Strauss said one more thing. Your father was 3 days from finishing it. He had everything except one authentication code. He went to meet a contact who he believed had that code. The contact worked for Harrow. She paused. Harrow knew exactly how close Cole was and let him get that close on purpose. Because the closer he got, the more certain it was that taking him down would end the investigation completely. Kira stopped with her hand on the doorframe. He made my father feel like he was winning. Yes. And then he took everything away. Strauss's voice was careful and controlled. I'm telling you this because you need to know the specific way this man thinks. He is patient. He is careful. And he is very good at making people feel like they are 3 moves ahead when they are actually 1 move from losing everything. Kira looked back at her. My father taught me chess, she said. He said the difference between a good player and a great player is that the great player never lets the board tell them where they are. They always calculate it themselves. She held Strauss's eyes. I've been calculating since the day I left Tennessee. Strauss looked at her for a long moment. Then she nodded once. Graduate tomorrow. Then go finish what Cole started. Graduation day. 14 candidates from the original 37. Their families filled the viewing area. Cameras captured every moment, the way cameras do when the military wants something to look like what it actually is. Strauss gave the address, and then did something that Mercer had not expected, and Voss had hoped for, and Kira had not allowed herself to imagine. She named Cole Dawson. She named Rebecca Ward. She named the Ridgeline program, and said the words that 7 dead handlers had died before anyone with authority was willing to say in public. When Mercer pinned Kira's trident himself, he leaned close enough that only she could hear him. I was wrong about you from the first morning, he said. Your father would be proud. He stepped back, saluted. She returned it with everything the gesture was worth. Voss stood in the front row with Atlas at his side. The dog's tan and black muzzle was going gray at the edges, but his attention was absolute and unwavering, fixed on the woman who had come back to finish what her father started. After the ceremony, Voss took her aside. He pressed Cole Dawson's dog tags into her hand. He gave these to me before Iron Hollow, Voss said. Told me to give them to you when you earned the right to wear them. He looked at her. He always knew you'd come. I just didn't know if I'd live long enough to be here when you did. Kira closed her hand around the tags, felt the metal warm against her palm. At the back of the crowd, a figure in dress uniform watched with the stillness of a man doing a threat assessment in real time. Rear Admiral Glenn Harrow. He had come personally. His phone buzzed. He read the text, typed back without hesitation. She's assigned to HQ as planned. We'll handle her there, quietly, like the others. He pocketed the phone and left before anyone who mattered noticed he had been there. But Kira had seen him, had felt his presence the way Atlas felt a storm front before the first cloud showed itself. She touched her father's dog tags through her uniform and thought of the recording and the voice on it, and the man who had given his life 3 days before he could use everything he had built.
3 moves ahead, she thought. Always.
The hunt was beginning, and this time the prey had no idea what was coming for it. 7 days between graduation and assignment felt like 7 years compressed into a week that moved too fast and too slow simultaneously. Kira spent them in Voss's safe house off base, memorizing everything he had built across 7 years of investigation. Financial records, death reports, mission logs from every Ridgeline handler who had rotated through Naval Special Warfare Command headquarters in the months before they died. The pattern was there if you knew how to read it. A constellation of eliminated operators that looked random until you connected every point back to a single origin. Rear Admiral Glenn Harrow. On the 6th day, Voss spread everything across the kitchen table and walked her through it one final time. Harrow arrived at NAV Spec War Command in 2004, he said. First handler death occurred 4 months later. He pulled a photograph.
Marcus Webb, 14 years in the program, died in what the official record calls a training equipment failure. His K9 partner survived. Harrow was promoted to deputy commander in 2016. The deaths accelerated after that. 3 in 18 months. He's getting bolder, Kira said. Or more desperate. Someone was getting close, and he needed to move faster. Voss turned another page. Your father was the closest anyone had ever gotten. He had mapped Meridian Tactical. He had the payment structure. He had communication intercepts. What he needed was one authentication code on one wire transfer that would connect Harrow's personal accounts directly to the shell company. He paused. He was meeting a contact who claimed to have that code the day before Iron Hollow. The contact worked for Harrow. Yes. He slid the photograph across the table. Cole knew he was being watched. He knew the contact might be a setup, but the authentication code was the one piece that turned everything else from circumstantial into irrefutable. He decided the risk was worth taking. Kira looked at her father's face in the photograph. 26 years old, grinning beside a puppy version of Atlas, looking like a man who still believed that getting close enough to the truth would protect him from the people trying to bury it. He was wrong about the contact, she said, but he was right about the code. Voss met her eyes. Which is why you're going into that building tomorrow. He pulled something from his jacket pocket and set it on the table between them. The data device. She had carried it for weeks now, and still felt its weight differently than its physical size justified. When you plug that into Harrow's system, you'll have 4 minutes at most before the security architecture detects the data transfer signature, Voss said. 4 minutes to capture 30 years of documentation. Banking credentials. Transaction records. Communication intercepts.
The authentication code your father died trying to reach. And if I'm caught inside his office, then you transmit whatever was captured before they shut you down, and I use partial data to go to NCIS. Voss's voice was steady. But Kira, partial data might not be enough. If Harrow gets even a fragment of warning before the evidence is complete, he'll bury it and disappear, and we lose him forever. Then I don't get caught. Voss looked at her for a long moment. Your father said something to me once. He said the difference between an operator who survives and one who doesn't isn't talent. It's the willingness to be honest about the moment when the situation has changed and your original plan no longer fits it. He put his hand on the device. If something goes wrong in there, you adapt.
You don't try to finish what you planned. You save what you have, and you get out. Kira picked up the device. I heard him say that exact thing when I was 12 years old. She put it in her pocket. He was teaching me to hunt. Said the deer doesn't care about your plan. The deer only cares about what you do when the plan stops working. Voss almost smiled. Go get some sleep. You're going to need it. She didn't sleep. She sat in the dark with Atlas's head on her knee and her father's dog tags in her fist, and she ran through every scenario she could construct until the scenarios stopped producing new information and she was left with the only thing that had ever actually mattered. Her father had built her for this moment. She was going to finish what he started, or she was going to die trying. And either way, Glenn Harrow was going to answer for every handler he had bought silence with. She reported to Naval Special Warfare Command Headquarters at 0800 the next morning. Cleared security without incident. Harrow's aide directed her to a conference room and told her the Admiral would see her shortly. She sat in a chair facing the door. Never put your back to an entrance. Her father's voice, teaching her something she had thought was about physical safety, and understood now was about something much larger. Harrow entered exactly 15 minutes later. He was everything his photographs suggested, and something the photographs couldn't capture. The specific gravity of a man who had spent 3 decades exercising authority in rooms full of people who needed to believe in him. Silver hair at regulation length. Uniform pressed to edges that could cut. He moved like someone who had never once in 30 years been genuinely surprised by anything. Petty Officer Dawson, his voice carried practiced warmth. The kind that was indistinguishable from the real thing, unless you had been trained to look for the gap between what a person's voice did and what their eyes did simultaneously. Congratulations on completing BUD/S. Quite an accomplishment. Thank you, sir. He sat across from her. I knew your father. Cole Dawson was an exceptional handler. His death was a tremendous loss to this program and to everyone who worked alongside him. The words hit exactly the way he intended them to hit. She received them without any visible reaction and filed what he was doing away in the part of her mind that kept the calculations. Yes, sir, she said. It was. I understand you're here to continue his work. Handler integration. Proving that operators with K9 backgrounds can excel across the full SEAL pipeline. He smiled. It's exactly the kind of initiative this command needs. He was probing, testing her responses, looking for the thing that would tell him how much she knew and how dangerous she was. My father believed handlers could be full operators, sir. I'm here to prove he was right. And Lieutenant Ward, I understand she was involved in your training before her accident. Harrow's voice carried exactly the right amount of careful regret. Another tremendous loss. She taught me a great deal about handler operations, sir. Harrow studied her with eyes that had been reading threats for 30 years. Then he told her she was being assigned to special programs, that she would have access to files most officers never saw, mission reports, personnel records, financial data for black programs. He described her access in precise detail and let the warning live in the precision without ever making it explicit. I take operational security seriously, sir. He stood. Welcome to Naval Special Warfare Command, Petty Officer Dawson. I look forward to working with you. He left before she could respond. 7 minutes. Long enough to assess the threat, short enough to maintain deniability about knowing exactly who she was. Kira sat alone in the conference room and felt the trap close around her with the quiet efficiency of something that had been designed by someone very good at designing traps. Harrow had put her in special programs specifically to watch her. Every file she touched would be monitored, every access logged. Every deviation from expected behavior would reach him within the hour. She texted Voss one word: compromised. His response came in 30 seconds. Expected. Proceed carefully. 6 months passed, the way time passes when you are doing something that requires absolute attention to the ordinary. Kira processed classified reports, attended briefings, coordinated operational data between SEAL teams and higher command. She was diligent and unremarkable and grateful, and she watched everything. She learned every rhythm of the building, who talked to whom and when, how information moved through official channels and shadow channels, where the gaps were between what was recorded and what actually happened. Harrow was meticulous. Everything he did had a legitimate surface. Every decision he made could be explained by operational necessity. But Kira had spent 6 weeks in BUD/S learning to read the spaces between actions, the silence that revealed more than anything said aloud. She mapped his pattern across 6 months. 3 contractors, always the same 3, meeting him off-site on a rotating schedule. 2 of them traced back to Paxton Risk Solutions through connections that required 6 months of careful cross-referencing to find. The 3rd had been implicated in an intelligence sale in 2013 that never resulted in charges because the evidence had disappeared before the investigation concluded. She texted Voss summaries in encrypted fragments. He texted back analysis. They built the case piece by piece the way her father had built it, except this time Voss was running backup, and the authentication code was 30 feet down the hall in a folder labeled Program Oversight on a computer that Kira had been studying the access protocols for since her 2nd week in the building. Then the moment arrived. Harrow scheduled an emergency off-site meeting with all 3 contractors on a Tuesday evening, the kind of coordination that only happened when something had gone critically wrong or was about to be finalized at a level that couldn't leave a paper trail inside the building. Kira volunteered for night watch duty. By 2300, the building had gone to skeleton staff, security making rounds, a handful of watch officers, everyone else somewhere that wasn't here. She waited until 23:30, then she moved. Harrow's office lock took her 40 seconds. She had been studying the electronic system for 4 months and had oiled the hinges during a routine maintenance window 3 days ago, when a duty assignment put her alone in the corridor for 11 minutes. Inside the office, she went directly to his computer. Power down. Standard security protocol. But she had watched him log in enough times across 6 months to know his credential pattern. His deceased wife's first 3 letters. His service number's last 4 digits. Not creative, but effective against anyone who hadn't spent 6 months earning the specific kind of attention that noticed everything. The desktop loaded. She opened the folder labeled Program Oversight and felt the breath leave her body when she saw the file structure inside it. Correspondence dating to 2004. Payment confirmations. Operational intelligence packages with routing addresses that connected to Russian military intelligence through 3 intermediary domains. And there, in a subfolder that required a secondary credential she had not anticipated, the authentication codes. Her father's missing piece. Right here, all of it. She plugged in the data device. Transfer initiated. Estimated time, 4 minutes. 1 minute elapsed. She pulled up the email archive, found the correspondence with Meridian Tactical, found wire transfer authorizations, found Harrow's personal authentication code on every single one, repeated across 16 years of transactions that each corresponded to a handler's death or a sold mission package. Her father had been 3 days from this. 2 minutes, 91%. The building's ventilation ran its usual rhythm. Footsteps passed in the corridor outside. Security making rounds. She froze. The footsteps continued without slowing. She kept working. 2 minutes 40, 97%. The elevator at the end of the hall descended. It should have been locked for the night. Someone with override access was using it and moving toward this floor, and her training told her to pull the device and run. And her father's voice told her, 3 moves ahead. Always 3 moves ahead. 98. 99. The outer office door opened. 100. Transfer complete. She pulled the device and had it in her pocket in the same motion. Dean Paxton stepped through the inner office door, with 3 operators behind him. The same 4 men from the compound standoff 6 months ago. The flat, professional eyes. The absence of hesitation that marked someone who had done this before and expected to do it again without consequence. Petty Officer Dawson. Paxton's voice was completely even. Step away from the computer. She raised her hands slowly and backed toward the window and let her face show exactly the right amount of fear. Because the amount of fear a person showed in this situation was data, and she needed Paxton to read the wrong data for the next 90 seconds. "I was checking files for tomorrow's briefing," she said, "at the Admiral's personal terminal using his credentials at midnight." Paxton moved into the room. His team spread to cut off the routes to the door. "I don't think so. This is a misunderstanding. I can explain everything. The Admiral wants to speak with you." He gestured to his team. "Full restraints." She didn't resist. The data device sat in her pocket, with 30 years of documentation on it, and the one piece her father had died trying to reach. And she let them put zip ties on her wrists and walked where they directed her, and calculated everything she needed to calculate in the time she had to calculate it. The elevator descended to basement levels that appeared on no official building schematic. Concrete walls, fluorescent lighting, the specific atmosphere of a space that existed for purposes that didn't survive contact with oversight. Harrow was already there. Civilian clothes, no rank insignia. Just a man who had arranged to be alone with a problem he intended to solve permanently. He sent Paxton out. Paxton hesitated. Harrow's voice carried 30 years of command authority. "I said, leave us." The door locked behind Paxton with electronic finality. Harrow looked at Kira the way a person looks at something that has surprised them, and they are still working out how to feel about being surprised. "You're better than your father," he said. "Cole never made it this far." "You killed him," Kira said. Not a question. A statement delivered with the flatness of a person who has known the answer for a very long time, and is now simply saying it aloud, in the presence of the person responsible. "I eliminated a threat to 16 years of operational security." His voice was completely even. "Your father found things he was not authorized to find. He made decisions about what to do with those things that made him a liability to an operation that was larger than any individual operator. I did what the situation required. You had Paxton plant charges in his helicopter fuel system." Harrow didn't deny it. He walked slowly around her the way he had walked around problems for 30 years. "Your father sat in this same building 7 years ago. He had banking records and communication intercepts and everything except the one authentication code that would have made the case irrefutable. He thought he was 3 moves ahead of me." Kira looked at him steadily. "He was. You just didn't know it yet." Something moved through Harrow's expression. Not quite uncertainty. Something adjacent to it. The first crack in 30 years of complete certainty. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" She met his eyes without blinking. "Because if I'm bluffing, why did Paxton's team arrive tonight instead of waiting for a cleaner window? You saw me access your system in real time. You already know I got everything." She paused. "My father taught me chess. He said a great player never lets the board tell them where they are. They calculate it themselves. I've been calculating since the day I left Tennessee. Harrow's jaw tightened. He reached for his sidearm. The lights died. Emergency systems flooded the basement in red. Gunfire erupted somewhere above them. Not a firefight. The disciplined, controlled shooting of people who knew exactly where every threat was located. Harrow grabbed her and pressed the sidearm against her temple and moved toward the door. He pulled it open. Master Chief Leonard Voss stood in the corridor with a shotgun pointed at Paxton's center mass. 67 years old, back straight as rebar, hands that had stopped shaking the moment the elevator doors opened. Beside him, Senior Chief Boyd Mercer held an M4 with the casual certainty of a man who had carried one in every combat zone America had fought in for 22 years. Behind them, Rafe Okafor and 5 operators fanned across the corridor in a formation that left no useful angle uncovered. "Let her go, Admiral." Voss's voice was the voice of a man who had been waiting 7 years to say exactly these words. "This ends here." Harrow pressed the weapon harder against her temple. "I will kill her, right now." "No, you won't." Kira's voice was quiet and completely certain. "Because you have spent 30 years making decisions based on survival, and dying in this basement doesn't help you survive anything." His grip didn't loosen, but something in it changed. She drove her elbow backward into his solar plexus with everything she had, twisted away from the weapon, dropped to the floor as Voss's shotgun fired. Harrow went backward against the wall, weapon clattering to concrete. Paxton raised his pistol toward Voss, and Mercer put 2 rounds through his chest before the motion completed. Okafor's team swept and cleared in seconds. Voss cut her restraints with a tactical knife. She pulled the data device from her pocket and held it up. "Everything is here," she said. 30 years, every handler, every transaction. The authentication code my father died to reach. Commander Strauss entered with NCIS agents and a federal warrant. She read Harrow his rights while he sat against the wall with his shoulder bleeding and his 30 years of untouchable certainty, finally and permanently broken. As they prepared to move him, he looked at Kira from across the room, not with hatred, with the specific expression of a man doing the last honest calculation of his life. "Your father was right about you," he said. "I know," Kira said. "That's why you should have taken him seriously 7 years ago." They took him away. The corridor began to empty. Atlas appeared from somewhere that nobody later remembered letting him in and pressed his heavy tan and black head against Kira's leg with the steadiness of an animal who has been doing his job since before she was old enough to understand what the job was. She put her hand on his head, felt his heartbeat. Steady, certain. The same heartbeat she had felt in the kennel on the morning everything changed. "We finished it," she told him quietly. "We finished what he started." The investigation consumed Washington the way fires consume things that have been dry for a long time. Fast, total, without negotiation. NCIS forensic accountants spent the first 2 weeks doing nothing but tracing the money. Every payment from Meridian Tactical Group to Harrow's offshore accounts across 16 years. Every transaction corresponding to a handler's death or a sold mission package. The architecture of it was meticulous in the way that only a man with 30 years of practice could make something meticulous. But the authentication codes on the wire transfers were irrefutable. Her father's missing piece, the one he had died 3 days before reaching, turned out to be the piece that made everything else impossible to argue around. Kira testified for 4 days straight. The federal courtroom was the kind of room that understood its own weight. She sat at the witness table and told them everything in the order it happened, starting with a telephone call her father made to Voss 7 years ago, and ending with the sound of Voss's shotgun in a basement that no official building schematic had ever acknowledged. She told them about Rebecca Ward and what Ward had known, and what knowing it had cost her. She told them about 7 handlers whose families had received folded flags and clean-typed official stories, and deserved something more honest than either of those things. On the second day of her testimony, the prosecution played her father's recording. "Voss, if you're hearing this, I'm probably already gone." The courtroom went completely quiet, in the way that rooms go quiet when a dead man's voice enters them. 3 of the 12 jurors wept openly. Harrow sat at the defense table and showed nothing. 30 years of practice at showing nothing. Kira watched his face while her father's voice filled the room, and she thought about what it cost a person to hear their own crime described in the voice of the person they had killed and feel nothing visible. She thought it cost more than he was showing. She thought the nothing was the most expensive performance he had ever given. The jury deliberated 70 minutes, guilty on all counts. As they walked Harrow from the courtroom in shackles, he passed within 10 feet of Kira. He stopped. The federal marshals on either side of him allowed it for exactly 3 seconds before they would move him again. And he used those 3 seconds to look at her with an expression that was not hatred and not defiance, and was something she had not expected. "Your father was right about everything," he said. "I should have understood that earlier." Kira looked at him and said nothing, because there was nothing left to say that the last 7 months hadn't already said more completely than words could manage. They moved him out. The courtroom emptied slowly. Voss found her in the corridor outside. He looked like a man who had set down something he had been carrying for so long that the absence of its weight was its own kind of disorientation. He didn't say anything at first. He just stood beside her, the way people stand beside each other when the right words haven't been invented yet for what they're both feeling. Finally, he said, "Cole would have found a way to make this moment about something other than himself." Kira almost smiled. He would have said the verdict was just the beginning, and then made a list of 6 other things that still needed doing. Voss actually smiled at that. He really would have. He looked at her. "You did what he couldn't. Not because you're better. Because you had everything he built, plus 7 years of grief that sharpened it into something he never had time to become." She looked at the corridor where Harrow had just disappeared. "Is it enough?" she asked. "Does this actually fix anything? Or does it just close one hole in something that has holes everywhere?" Voss was quiet for a moment. "It fixes 7 families who spent years being told a lie. It fixes the next handler who would have died because the pattern was still running." He met her eyes. "And it fixes the promise you made. That matters. That's not nothing." Mercer found her an hour later outside the building. He looked like a man who had processed everything he had participated in over the last 7 months, and was still working through the last layer of it. He had stood in that corridor beside Voss with an M4 and put himself between Paxton's weapon and the people he was protecting. And that act had changed something fundamental in how he understood his own career. "I've been doing this job for 22 years, he said. "I thought I knew what the job was." He was quiet for a moment. "I didn't know there was a version of this program where the threat was coming from inside the institution I was trying to protect." "Most people don't," Kira said. "That's not an excuse." "No, but it's a reason." She looked at him. "You course-corrected when you had enough information to course-correct. You stood in that corridor when you didn't have to stand anywhere." "That's not nothing either," Mercer nodded slowly. He reached into his jacket and pulled out something small. A challenge coin. Naval Special Warfare. The kind that operators gave each other to mark shared history and shared cost. I had this made after my first deployment. Carried it for 20 years. He held it out. I'd like you to have it. Kira took it, turned it over. The metal was warm from 20 years in his pocket. Thank you, Senior Chief. He looked at her one more time with the expression of a man who had made peace with something difficult and was going to carry the peace carefully because it had cost him something to get there. Then he walked away. Okafor appeared beside her so quietly she didn't hear him coming, which was notable because she heard almost everything. The two handlers I told you about, he said. In Helmand? He paused. NCIS contacted their families last week. Told them the official record was being corrected. That the accidents weren't accidents. He stopped. I watched one of those men die believing he had failed at something. Believing the mission had gone wrong because of something he did or didn't do. His family believed that for 6 years. He met her eyes. You gave them something back. Kira held that for a moment. It wasn't the kind of thing that could be responded to with anything that wouldn't make it smaller than it was. I'm glad, she said finally. Okafor nodded. Then he said, Strauss wants to talk to you. When you're ready. Kira went to find Strauss. Strauss was in an office that wasn't her base commander's office anymore, because 3 months after Harrow's arrest, a congressional review had reorganized Naval Special Warfare Command from the top 2 layers down, and Strauss had been given authority over a unit that hadn't existed before and didn't have an official name yet. She was sitting behind a desk, covered in organizational charts and personnel files, and she looked like a woman who had been given exactly the kind of problem she was built to solve, and was in the early stages of enjoying it. Sit down, Kira. She gestured to the chair across from her. I'll skip the part where I tell you what you already know about what you accomplished, and get to the part you don't know yet. Kira sat. The Ridgeline program is being formally reconstituted, Strauss said. Not as an attachment, not as a support unit, as a fully integrated component of Naval Special Warfare operations. Handlers with SEAL qualifications operating with full authority inside SEAL team structures. Real missions. Real command authority. Everything Rebecca Ward spent her career arguing for. She met Kira's eyes. I need someone to build it. Someone who understands both sides of what this program needs to be. Kira was quiet for a moment. Okafor, she said. He has the operational experience, and he understands the handler side from working alongside Ridgeline in Afghanistan. I want him involved in the build. Already spoken to him. He said yes before I finished the question. Strauss opened a folder. I also have 3 handlers currently in the pipeline who fit the profile. One of them is 3 weeks from completing BUD/S. How long do I have to get the structure built before the first operational deployment? 6 months, maybe 8 if we push it. Strauss leaned forward. This is going to be complicated, Kira. There are people inside this institution who are going to resist this program for reasons that have nothing to do with Harrow and everything to do with how they've always understood the relationship between handlers and operators. You're going to spend as much time fighting that resistance as you spend building the operational structure. I've had practice, Kira said. Strauss almost smiled. Yes, you have. Kira stood. One condition, name it. Atlas operates with the program. As long as he's physically capable, he deploys. He's the most decorated K9 in Ridgeline history, and he has institutional knowledge that can't be replicated through training. She held Strauss's eyes. And when he can't deploy anymore, He retires with me. Not to a kennel. With me. Strauss looked at her for a moment. Then she wrote something on the organizational chart in front of her. Done, she said. Both conditions. 3 months after the trial, Kira stood at a grave in Arlington National Cemetery. The headstone had been recarved. The official version removed. The truth put in its place, in the plain language that truth deserved. Master Sergeant Cole Dawson, United States Army Special Forces, 1969 to 2017. Handler, operator, father. The truth he carried outlived everything they did to bury it. Fresh flowers against the base of the stone from someone she didn't know and didn't need to know. Her father had touched people she would never meet. That was part of his shape in the world. Voss arrived first, moving more carefully than he had 6 months ago, but with the same certainty in his eyes. Then Mercer. Then Okafor, with 2 of the German shepherds on leads. Devon Reese, the kennel master. 3 handlers currently in the Ridgeline pipeline. Young enough that they had never heard Cole Dawson's name before this year, and old enough now to understand what it meant. Atlas stayed pressed against Kira's left leg without being asked, his tan and black head level with her hip, his attention divided between her face and the headstone in front of them. They stood around the grave in the October cold and let the silence hold what it needed to hold. Voss spoke first. He told them about Kuwait in 1991, about a 24-year-old handler who photographed 34 images of a weapons cache that someone powerful wanted to stay buried, about the 30 years between that moment and this one, about what it cost and what it meant and what it was now going to make possible for every handler who came after. Mercer said, I was wrong about her from the first morning. He said it to the headstone, not to the people around him. I want you to know I understand that. And I want you to know that what you built in her is the reason 7 families have the truth instead of a folded flag and a lie. Okafor said nothing. He stood with his hands in his pockets and his head slightly bowed, and the specific posture of a man honoring people he never met, but understood precisely. Kira knelt beside the headstone, pressed her palm flat against the marble, felt the cold of it, and then the warmth where her hand was. I finished it, Dad, she said quietly. I finished what you started. All of it. The program is being rebuilt the way you and Ward always said it should be. Handlers with full authority. No more attachments. No more second-class operators. She paused. Atlas is with me. He's been with me the whole time. She looked at the dog. He knew before I did what this was going to be. Atlas pressed his muzzle against her cheek and held it there. She gripped the dog tags at her throat. Her father's tags, worn smooth now from 7 years of fingers finding them in every moment that required anchoring. She felt their familiar weight, felt everything they connected her to across time and loss, and the specific stubbornness of people who refuse to let the truth stay buried. She stood. Voss was watching her with the expression of a man who had just watched something complete itself that he had been waiting decades to see completed. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a worn leather notebook. Cole Dawson's field notes. Decades of handler knowledge handwritten across hundreds of pages. Early entries in her father's handwriting. Later entries in Voss's careful script. He held it out. He started this in 1991, Voss said. I added to it for 30 years. Now it's yours. Teach from it. Build from it. Leave space for the next person who comes after you to add to it. Kira took the notebook, opened it to the first page. Her father's handwriting. 1991. A handler and a dog are not a handler and a tool. They are 2 parts of a single operator. Trust the dog first. Figure out why later. She closed it. I'll fill the rest, she said. Voss put his hand on her shoulder. That's what we're here for. All of us. We pass the watch to the people who can carry it further than we could. He looked at Atlas, then back at her. And you, Kira. You carry it as far as it needs to go. The Ridgeline program took 6 months to build and a lifetime to earn the right to build. Kira spent the first 3 months doing 2 things simultaneously that most people would have considered incompatible. She was designing an operational structure for a program that had never officially existed, and she was fighting every institutional reflex inside Naval Special Warfare Command that had spent 30 years treating handlers as support elements rather than operators. The resistance was not hostile. It was something harder to push against than hostility. It was habit. The settled certainty of people who had done things a particular way for long enough that the particular way had stopped feeling like a choice and started feeling like gravity. She sat across from a 2-star admiral in her 4th week of the build and listened to him explain, patiently and with genuine respect, why the integration she was proposing would create command confusion in high-tempo operational environments. He used the word attachment 11 times in 20 minutes. Each time he used it, he meant something slightly different, and each different meaning pointed toward the same underlying assumption that handlers were auxiliary, that dogs were equipment with heartbeats, that the relationship between a handler and a K9 was a specialized support function rather than a combat capability that had been systematically undervalued for 30 years. Because the people who understood it best kept dying before they could make the institutional case. Kira waited until he finished. Then she told him about Damascus in 2019, about a basement door in a compromised compound that standard protocol said to leave for EOD, about a dog named Freya reading human distress behind that door in a way that no piece of equipment could have replicated. About 4 children who were alive because a handler had learned to trust what her dog knew before she could articulate why. The Admiral listened. His expression didn't change, but something behind it did. She came back 3 more times over the next 2 weeks. Each time she brought something different. Operational data, after-action reports from Ridgeline deployments that had never appeared in any official assessment because the program had been kept deliberately small and deliberately invisible to protect it from exactly the kind of institutional elimination that Harrow had eventually achieved anyway. She built the case the way her father had taught her to build any case, 1 piece at a time, each piece making the next piece easier to place. By the end of the 3rd month, the 2-star admiral had stopped using the word attachment. Okafor ran the operational side of the build with the efficiency of someone who had been doing this in his head since Helmand Province and was relieved to finally be doing it out loud. He identified the 3 handlers in the pipeline within the first week, ran them through an assessment protocol he and Kira designed together over 4 consecutive 14-hour days. All 3 passed. 2 of them exceeded the standard they had designed in ways that neither Kira nor Okafor had fully anticipated. That's your father's program, Okafor told her after the 2nd assessment. That quality didn't appear from nowhere. Someone built it into those people. Voss built it, Kira said. Ward built it. My father built it. And 7 other handlers who died before they got to see what they were building. The first time she stood in front of the full Ridgeline team as its commanding officer, she had prepared nothing to say. She had written 3 drafts and discarded all of them, because they all sounded like the kinds of things people said when they wanted to mark a moment, rather than actually be in it. She looked at the 11 people in front of her. 3 new handlers with their German shepherds sitting at their feet. Okafor to her right. Mercer, who had requested a transfer to the program 6 weeks earlier and had not explained the request to anyone except her, standing at the back. Devin Reese, the kennel master. Two veterans of Ridgeline deployments who had survived the Harrow years by staying small and staying invisible, and were now being asked to stop doing both. And Atlas, pressed against her left leg with his tan and black head turned slightly upward, watching her face with the steady attention of an animal who understood that something important was happening and was waiting to understand his role in it. "I'm not going to tell you what this program means," she said. "You already know what it means. You're here because you know." She looked at each of them in turn. "What I'm going to tell you is what it costs, because everyone who built this program before us paid a cost that we are standing on right now. And the only way to honor that cost is to never pretend it was something other than what it was. People died to make this room possible. We work in a way that makes sure their deaths meant something." No one spoke. The silence was the specific kind that forms when a group of people has just heard something they intend to carry with them. Mercer spoke from the back after a moment. His voice was quiet, but it carried. "I spent 22 years teaching candidates what belonging in this institution looked like." He paused. "I had it wrong. Belonging isn't about what you look like coming in. It's about what you do when the institution asks you to choose between what's comfortable and what's right." He met Kira's eyes. "This program is proof of what choosing right looks like, even when it takes 30 years and costs everything it cost." The program's first operational deployment came 8 months after Kira took command. A joint task force operation in a region that didn't appear in public reporting, and wouldn't for another 3 years. 2 Ridgeline handler teams embedded with SEAL team elements. Full operational authority. Atlas ran point on the K9 assessment component, alongside a younger German shepherd named Rook, who had come up through the new pipeline, and had already developed the same quality of attention that made Atlas exceptional. The operation ran across 4 days, and produced the kind of outcome that made the 2-star admiral, who had used the word attachment 11 times, stop using it permanently. On the 3rd night, Rook alerted on a building that aerial surveillance had assessed as unoccupied. The team lead wanted to move past it. Standard protocol, limited time window. The assessment data said unoccupied, and assessment data usually meant something. Kira's handler, a 24-year-old from Georgia named Petty Officer Delaney, read something different in Rook's posture. The particular quality of alert that meant not explosives, something alive, something that needed to be found. Delaney made the call. They breached. Found 11 people in a basement space that the surveillance data hadn't captured. 3 of them were American. 2 of those 3 had been listed as missing for 14 months. Afterward, the team lead found Kira in the extraction staging area. He was a man who had been doing this job for 16 years and had the face of someone who had stopped being surprised by most things and was processing being surprised by this one. "I almost overrode her," he said, "about the alert. I had the assessment data, and she had a dog that was standing differently than it had been standing 30 seconds earlier." He shook his head slowly. "I almost made the wrong call." "But you didn't," Kira said, "because she was right." He met Kira's eyes. "Because your handler knew what her dog was telling her, and trusted it. And I'm going to spend a while thinking about what would have happened to those 3 Americans if she hadn't." Kira thought about a basement door in Damascus in 2019, about the handler who had read something different in her dog's posture and breached alone while standard protocol said wait. About what it cost to trust that kind of knowing, and what it cost when institutions trained people out of trusting it. "That's the program," she said. "That's what we're building." The congressional hearing came 6 months after the first deployment. The Senate Armed Services Committee had been waiting for enough operational data to make the case for formal program recognition and funding. Kira sat at the witness table in her dress uniform, with her father's dog tags under the collar where her hand kept finding them, and told them everything. The operational history, the deployment data, the outcomes that couldn't be explained by any framework that treated dogs as equipment and handlers as support. And she told them about Cole Dawson, about Rebecca Ward,
about 7 Hambers whose names deserved to be in a formal congressional record, rather than buried in classified files that had been scrubbed by a man now serving consecutive life sentences in a federal facility in Kansas. When she finished, Senator Margaret Holt, 71 years old, the kind of face that had absorbed enough institutional failure to stop being surprised by it, but had not stopped being angry about it, leaned forward. "Petty Officer Dawson," she said, "the people you've described, your father, Lieutenant Ward, the other handlers, they spent years trying to make this institution understand something that this institution was not willing to hear." She paused. "What do you want us to do with that?" Kira looked at her directly. "Hear it now. Fund the program. Give every handler who comes through this pipeline the authority and the recognition that the operators they deploy alongside have always had, and put the names of the 7 handlers Harrow eliminated into the official congressional record, so their families have something true to hold on to, instead of the official story they were given." Holt wrote something on the paper in front of her. Then she looked up. "Done," she said. "All of it." The program's formal recognition came through 6 weeks later. 11 pages of congressional authorization that Voss read 3 times in Kira's kitchen, while Atlas slept on his feet, and outside the window, the world continued doing what the world does, indifferent to the specific gravity of what had just been made official. He was 70 years old, and he looked it. And he looked like a man who had just watched the weight of 30 years become something other than weight. Cole would have read this 11 times, he said. He would have found something to argue with in paragraph 4, Kira said. Voss laughed. It was a real laugh, the kind that comes from somewhere that has been closed for a long time and has finally opened. 1 year after the program's formal recognition, Kira stood at the Naval Special Warfare Symposium at Coronado, the same compound where, 6 years earlier, a senior chief had thrown her through a gate and waited for screaming that never came. The audience filled every seat. Flag officers, SEAL team commanders, 43 graduates of the Ridgeline pipeline she had built from the leather notebook her father had started in 1991. Okafor sat in the front row beside Mercer. Voss was beside them. Atlas was at Voss's feet, his muzzle fully gray now, moving more slowly than he had 2 years ago, but his eyes still carrying the same quality of absolute steady attention that had never once wavered since the morning he lay down beside her in a kennel and chose her over his training. She stood at the podium and looked at the faces of the people her father's choices and her own had gathered in this place, and felt the full weight of what it had cost and what it had produced, and the specific relationship between those two things. 6 years ago, she said, a senior chief threw me into a K9 compound and waited for the screaming to start. She paused. What he didn't know was that the dog in that compound had been waiting 7 years for exactly the person he had just thrown inside. She looked at Atlas. What none of us knew was that the moment those two things met, everything that followed became inevitable. She told them about her father. She told them the version that was now in the congressional record, the true version, the one that cost what it cost to make official. She told them about Voss and Ward and the 7 handlers whose names were now carved into a memorial panel outside the main building at Naval Special Warfare Command. She told them about Mercer, who had been wrong and had said so and had stood in a corridor with an M4, because being wrong the first time didn't mean you had to be wrong when it mattered most.
She looked directly at the 43 graduates of the program her father had started building in Kuwait in 1991. "You are here because people refused to let the truth stay buried," she said. "Not because it was safe, not because the institution was ready to hear it. Because some truths are too important to stay buried, and some people are too stubborn to let them." She touched the dog tags at her throat. "Your dogs know things you don't know yet. Trust them first. Figure out why later. That's not a technique. That's a philosophy. And it is the philosophy this program was built on, and will continue to be built on long after everyone in this room is gone." She stepped back from the podium. The applause started with Voss. He stood slowly, the way men stand when their joints have absorbed too many hard years, and he put his hands together, and the sound of it was the sound of 30 years of carrying something, finally setting it down in a place where it would be held by more than one pair of hands. One by one, the room rose. 43 graduates and their dogs, every dog coming to attention simultaneously, in the particular way that trained animals respond to the emotional register of the people around them, reading the room the way they always read rooms, knowing before any human in the space what the moment actually weighed. Afterward, Mercer found her alone on the beach. He didn't say anything for a while. They stood together and listened to the Pacific doing what it had been doing for longer than any institution had existed, and would keep doing long after all of them were gone. Finally, he said, "I pinned your trident. You remember what I said when I did it?" "I remember." "I meant it. And I want you to know that every candidate who comes through the handler integration pipeline, from this point forward, every person I assess and train and eventually pin a trident on, I am going to see your father in them. I'm going to see what it looks like when someone builds something that survives them." He met her eyes. "And I'm never going to mistake the container for what's inside it again." Kira looked at him for a long moment. Then she said the things she had been carrying since the morning he stood beside Voss in that corridor with an M4, and chose the harder side of the line. "Thank you, Boyd." It was the first time she had used his first name. He received it the way people receive things they didn't know they needed until the moment they arrived. She walked back up the beach alone, with Atlas moving at her left side, his pace slower than it had been, but his presence no less absolute. She put her hand on his head and felt his heartbeat, and thought about her father, who had trusted a dog before he trusted the institution, and had been right about that order of priority in every way that ultimately mattered. She touched the dog tags at her throat, felt their familiar weight against her collarbone. Cool and then warm where her fingers rested. Her father had started something in a warehouse in Kuwait in 1991 with a 34-image photographic record of a truth someone powerful wanted buried. He had kept building it across 26 years of service until the last 3 days of his life, when the building had cost him everything. He had left behind a recording and a notebook, and a dog, and a daughter who had inherited all three and understood what they were for. Kira Dawson had walked into a K9 compound 6 years ago as the woman they thought they could throw away, and walked out as the woman those dogs had always known she was. She had finished what her father started. She had built what Rebecca Ward had died believing was possible. She had given 7 families the truth that had been taken from them, and 43 handlers the authority that had been withheld from their predecessors. The program was real. The watch had been passed, and the legacy Cole Dawson had begun building before his daughter was old enough to understand what a legacy was, would now outlive both of them, carried forward by people who had never met him, but stood on everything he had refused to stop building, even when building it cost him his life. That was what it meant to leave something behind that mattered. Not the monuments, Not the official records. Not even the congressional authorization in 11 pages that Voss had read 3 times in her kitchen. It was the 43 handlers on that beach who trusted their dogs first and would teach the next generation to do the same, and the generation after that, until the truth Cole Dawson had given his life to protect became so embedded in the institution that no single man with enough power and patience could ever bury it again. Atlas pressed against her leg, his heartbeat under her palm. Steady, certain, unbroken. Cole Dawson's daughter had kept every promise she ever made, and the wolf pack would never fall silent again.